Welcome to another session of Learner's Mindset Discussion. I'm Dr. Dwayne Harapnik, and my esteemed colleague joining us today is
Dr. Sue Bedard.
Well, Sue and I work collaboratively in the ADL program, and today we're going to be exploring podcasting or long-form video discussion. And it's a subject dear to our hearts, and believe it or not, it's a subject that both of us have been doing for a few decades. Yeah, I know we're dating ourselves here, but we've been doing this for quite a while, not necessarily in the way we see podcasts today on on Spotify or Apple or things like that. But in the past, we used to do it different. So we're going to be talking about podcasting a little bit. And then more importantly, we're going to shift the focus of the conversation to take a look at how you should be creating your own podcasts, right? This is something that's going to be really important. So this is where we're going today. Now, Sue, tell me a little bit about your experience with podcasts in the past and maybe some of the things you're doing now.
Okay, sure. So in the past, decades ago, when we had technology like cassette recorders, when I was in third grade, teaching in third grade, not in third grade, we had a listening center and the kids would go over, put the little cassette tape in, put their headphones on and listen to the story being read to them. Then they'd go over to the next center and they'd have to do something that connected to that listening center that they just kind of walked through to improve their listening skills. So our old technology, cassette players, worked really well. As time moved on and other things came out, like QR codes. So one time I had my kids do book reviews. They would read a book, and I didn't like to grade the reviews on paper because you can hardly read the little kids' writings. That was a lot of work. So I came up with, if they made a recording, a voice recording, they could create that and turn it into a QR code, paste it to the inside of the book cover, and when the next student wanted to know, hey, is this book any good, they could just read the QR code and listen to the reviewer give their details about the story. So that was two instances. And then the third instance later on, sometime in the 90s, with new technology, my high school students created a 5-minute weekly podcast of the events that were taking place at school. They decided that the closed captioning TV, the news program that all schools have, that wasn't good enough. And they wanted to move out and do a weekly so that whoever on the internet, on the MySpace page, could listen to what was happening at our high school. So I've had a lot of instances along the way of podcasting, but based on the technology at the time.
Well, that's exciting. And it's interesting. I had a big grin on my face because the cassette idea is something that I too had worked with. I've always been involved in alternative delivery or distance education. And back in the late 80s and early 90s, we used to get together and over the telephone, talk to, different experts would talk to each other. I'd been interviewed by public broadcasting organizations, and I'd get the tape, and we'd build these libraries of cassette tapes that we would then send around to different centers, right? So yeah, it's podcasting, but in a really difficult way. In the mid to late 90s, I did a fair amount of work with video conferencing in a more sophisticated way, not what we're doing right now, not web-based video conferencing. We're talking the really expensive stuff. And so building discussions, building these repositories is something I've always been engaged in. And the reason that it's important to talk about our past is that just the other day, you and I both listened to a podcast. We didn't plan this, but we both listened to it. It was the Cult of Pedagogy, and they talked about the importance of bringing podcasting into your classroom. And it was interesting because the other day we're talking about this podcast activity that we have in this one course that you're currently teaching right now. And you said, "Oh, I listened to this podcast. I listened. I'm about to listen to it too." And guess what? Wonderful stuff. So I'm gonna include a link to this podcast in our notes here. But in that podcast, they really did a wonderful job explaining how important it is to bring in this form of communication and this type of a resource into your classroom at all levels, whether it's young kids, it's high school students, or it's in higher ed. It doesn't really matter the level. You can bring a wealth of experts into your environment through the podcast, or what I also like to refer to as a long form video discussion. I'm a fan of Joe Rogan. I know he's a foul-mouthed comedian, but boy, he asks good questions. And I have listened to that interview he did with Elon Musk a couple of times, and it's brilliant. That went on for almost 3 hours. I listened to, now I cranked up the speed to almost 2 times so I could listen to it faster, right? But it was amazing to hear that dialogue between Rogan and Musk. And Rogan would ask Musk a question, and Musk would pause. And I remember watching it and thinking, is he going to say something? Is he going to say something? And then I'm going, oh, he's actually thinking about his answer. Brilliant, right? So, and nothing was staged. It just happened organically. So it's an amazing thing. Right. So, using podcasts, bringing them in is really important. But we want to go in that different tangent. How important do you think is it for us to get our students to create their own podcasts, their own long form video discussions? Why do you think that's important, Sue?
Well, I think kids want to have a voice. I think they feel, and they do, have a lot of really important things to say. If you sit down and just have a conversation with kids, I know for me in my STEM Enrichment Center, I have these conversations all the time, and it just makes me go, huh, we need to explore this. This is a really good idea. So just because I set the game plan for the day, actually, I really don't even know why I set the game plan for the day, because as soon as I lay it out and we talk to the kids, the game plan shifts a little bit. So now I'm at the point where I present an idea with no guidance, no direction, just an idea. And as the kids are talking about it, eventually our activity for the day evolves, if you will. So I think podcasting would give them a way to say, hey, I'm only 9 years old, but I know how we can clean the oceans, and put it out there. Or I'm 12 years old and I have a car that doesn't use gasoline, and this is how it's going to run. And the more these ideas get out there, I think problems will start to be solved. But the ideas need to get out there. And I think podcasting for kids would be one way to do this.
I couldn't agree with you more. I want to expand on something you introduced, this notion of helping students find their voice. So in the ADL program, we use this notion of creating a significant learning environment where we give students choice, ownership, and voice through authentic learning opportunities. So students do real projects, real world work in our program, and they find and develop their voice. Now, you mentioned that. This happens for our graduate students, but guess what? We want our younger students to develop their voice at an earlier age. It's important for them to make that contribution. Who knows? We could have a cure for cancer, the potential cure for cancer, or a solution to some of our environmental problems right within your iBuild Academy students, right? It could be right there, and giving them the opportunity to explore these ideas, to talk about these ideas in a long form dialogue, in a long form discussion, and knowing that this is serious. Okay. So yes, getting kids to talk about this, but when you put it into a video or you put it into a podcast, guess what? It's real. It's going to be made available to everybody on the internet, and it's real.
It raises expectations.
Oh, totally. They've created it. It's theirs too. They own it, right? There's that pride of ownership. Oh, I know in our preparation for this, you talked about that group of students that you had working on that announcement, right?
Yep.
Share the scenario there and what they did and what they learned from that.
So what we had done was I had about 8 or 9 kids that were all excited about this weekly. It was actually, we called it a radio show because that's what we had at the time. It was going to take 5 minutes. They storyboarded out how long each segment would take, who was going to go get the recordings, and who was going to put them together, this whole thing. And then it came time to record. So they recorded. Wasn't good enough. They recorded. Wasn't good enough. They recorded. Wasn't good enough. 2 weeks later, they're still recording. My only thing at the time was no cuss words, because these are high school kids, and after the 29th time of reading the dialogue, you know what's going to come out next. And then they told me they were all done, and they were so excited and they were so happy. And I said, well, this stuff is 3 weeks old. Like, it's already happened. Well, what are we going to do? I said, well, we're going to put it out there, but as an archive. And now we're going to work on the next one. But if you want to have a current events radio show, you got to keep it current. But what was so, I think the process was so important because of that ownership piece. It had to be perfect. It couldn't have the stuttering, what's the next word? They just didn't want it. They didn't want it to be a casual conversation. They wanted it to be perfect. And for some of these kids, I never saw them work to that ability. Like, the switch just went on, and they realized this is what I have to do.
Yeah, that is so important. And you've touched on something that is what we hope to get our learners to in the ADL program with the podcasting, with the long form discussion. The exciting thing about a program, our students are really taking ownership of their innovation plans, and they are really finding their voice. And I can hardly wait to see the results of this activity. This is the first time we're going to be running it in this particular program. I've done this in other scenarios, but I know the pride of ownership that is going to be kicking in. And I can think of a few key students who are going to be somewhat perfectionist, but at the same time, they're going to get to the point where they're going to, just have to, do what they do. And we did the same thing. Hey, before we did this, playing around the lights, and I'm always checking my hair, and I'm always frustrated because my hair, my hair stands up the back. But you know what? Sometimes you just got to go with the way that it is.
It's who you are. It's who you are.
It is. It's real. It's live. It's real. We talked about these ideas, and as you can tell from listening to us, we're not really all that scripted here. And I think that's also an important thing. Now, the reason that this is important is that this is what we do. This is what you and I do, right? We do this. We talk about these ideas regularly. And so with this learner's mindset discussions, you and I are talking about these ideas in the same way Talissa and I have talked about these ideas, and I've talked with other people, but we bring other people into our world, and we share these ideas, and we can encourage people to, go out there, explore, experiment, create a discussion. We're using Zoom. We're just doing this in Zoom. Okay, yeah, I've got a special recorder where I've balanced out our sound levels, but you don't have to be that fancy. You can simply set up a Zoom or a Skype session and hit the record button, and you've got a podcast on the go. Right now, the exciting thing with our ADL students—
use your cell phone.
Oh, yeah, definitely. With our ADL students, there's going to be groups of 3, 4, or 5. And so you're going to see a few more faces on the screen. I think it's going to be quite interesting. But the key thing that you touched on, which is so important, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the work that you do with the iBuild Academy, this idea of allowing students to take that ownership, to explore, to experiment, to find their voice, to find who they are, and then to share it. That makes all the difference in the world. Now, you do that every day in your iBuild Academy. You change young people's lives. Tell us a little bit about that, and how you're planning to bring podcasting into what you do with iBuild.
All right, sure. So about 5 years ago, I decided that instead of talking about reinventing education, I had to actually go do something. I had been talking to students around the globe about our system is broken. The technology has brought new dimension to it, and the public school system here in the States just not doing what it needs to be doing. We want to teach to the test instead of teach to a real world skill. So after years of talking about we got to have change, I just walked away from a really nice job and said, I'm going to open a place where kids can come and change the world. There's going to be some direction because I won't have a lot of materials. There's going to be some rules. I don't want anybody getting hurt. But for the most part, it's a cross between makerspace and school and prompting, no testing. So there's no pressure, and failure is embraced. The growth mindset is totally embraced. So the kids come. We have several different offerings. Sometimes they just come for an hour after school and they work in Scratch and they try to make a game, or they work with video, make stop motion movies. So that's like one opportunity where they guide the learning. Like, what do you want to do today? I'm going to make a movie. What's it going to be about? Blah, blah, blah. Right. And they just kind of pull it all together. So in the last couple of years, we started a hybrid program for homeschoolers because the public school kids, unfortunately, are in school. So these kids will come on Tuesdays and Thursdays and spend 6 hours with us. And we give them opportunities to go through. They do some programming, they do some typing. They all create an e-portfolio, which they all cry about until the end of the year when they see this vast amount of stuff and all the things that we did and talked about. But it's okay, we get them through. And then we have our science section. So our science section runs through both an engineering design process or a scientific method so that we can expose them to both ways to, let's just say, do science. Usually it's an open-ended project. Like I'm going to give them a piece of paper and they have to figure out how to make the longest link of chain, right? They get one piece of paper, they have 10 minutes, we have a few constraints, off you go. No conversation pre-activity, just watch kids. That's my job, just watch them, no fighting. And they sit there for a few minutes kind of stunned because there's no direction. I don't know what to do. And then someone starts talking and the next thing you know, we have this 30-foot long chained link piece of paper. So then we talk about the process. How did you get here? Why did you get here? It's learning at a whole different level. Kids, I always say, kids have been schooled. They learn how to go to school. Tell me what to do, I do it, I move on. Tell me what to do, I do it, I move on. There's nowhere in life that works like that. I've never had a job where they said, do this, okay, you're done. Okay, do this, okay, you're done. Oh, you didn't do that well, you're fired, right? So over here, we're encouraging the build, the redesign. No, it still doesn't work. The redesign, and talking about different possibilities. Work. Well, mine's not like yours. Well, what's different? So we do more prompting and questioning than telling. Very rarely do we tell. We worked with LEDs and coin batteries this summer. And what we wanted them to do was to make something move and light up. They all had a little vibrating motor as well. And we didn't tell them anything about positive, negative. We didn't tell them anything about wiring, about circuitry. We just said, here you go. Now, some of these pieces work well with the other pieces you have. Some of them you don't need. Some of them are just there for support. And the next thing we knew, we had these fans that were oscillating and they had lights on them. One kid realized if they put two different colors, he would get two different spinning wheels as it moved around. It took, 25, 35 minutes for all of this to take place. In the conversations from screaming excitement to, I did it, look at this. And I'd be in another area of the room and they'd call me down, Miss Sue, you got to see this. I said, how did you do that? And one of the little guys says, and this kid was about 6-ish, he goes, I don't know, I just did. I said, what do you mean you don't know? Well, I said, that's how you did it. And we broke it down into steps. And he goes, I've never done anything like this before. This is so cool. And then they all started talking the what ifs. What if I did this? What if I added that? What if I found this? Do you have any of this? Because I need that to do this. It's just another It's another way to teach kids without telling them. And you want to talk about finding voice, you want to talk about ownership, pride, willingness to do more without being told. How many kids do that? Well, your wheels don't roll. Well, that's okay. It's still a car. No, it's not. It's a dust collector. It doesn't move. Okay. And they go back to the drawing board, figure it out. My wheels are moving, and that wasn't hard. Well, why did you think it was going to be hard? Well, I don't know, because you didn't tell us how to do it. So again, we just keep, you got to find the right people to work there. We don't handhold. And with our hybrid program, after 3 or 4 days of coming, they start figuring out they're in charge. And the best things happen at that point. So that's kind of my little program in a nutshell. It's actually, not surprisingly, doing really well.
That sounds exciting. And the reason I have a big grin on my face is that I've been experimenting with the same thing, and everything we do with the learner's mindset, everything we do in the ADL program, all my research for the last 30 years has been focused on creating that significant learning environment where you give the learner that opportunity to take ownership of the learning.
Yep.
And to engage and to build and to create and to fail and to explore and to really actually learn how to learn. And that's the key thing, embrace deeper learning. Mm-hmm. And the exciting thing that I'm hearing is that these young kids, a 6-year-old young boy, I never did that before. Well, actually, yeah, you did when you were 3 or 4. You just didn't think about it. That's that natural inquisitive nature that most people have. And you're reigniting that. You're letting kids know that actually, you know what? That's the way we all learn. And that's the way that the world can be improved and the world can work, right? So podcasting will allow the students to actually take their voice and to share what they're doing and maybe take it to another level, right? And so I know you've talked about wanting to have students to sort of pull together sort of, what would you call it, an inventory or an archive or summary of the work that they're doing on a weekly basis. Is that some of the ways that you're going to be doing the podcasting?
That is definitely some of the ways. And I think that's a lower level, just kind of summarizing what we did. I want to get to the point where we start brainstorming what we're going to do and why are we going in that direction. So that when we do the summarizing, we can compare what we hoped to do and what we did do and have it in this format where, I think there's something to put it out there. It makes it, like you say, it makes it real. And you can't backtrack on it because there it is. So no, you said, no, I didn't. Well, yes, you did. It's right here. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I did. Okay. So now let's follow that thought. You can change your idea. You can change your thought because that's the beauty of this. That's the reinventing, the re-engineering, the redesigning process. There's nothing wrong with that. This doesn't work. We'll scrap it. If it totally fails, guess what we learned? That idea totally is not okay. It doesn't work. So what do we do now? What's plan B? That's kind of where I want to take it. Yes, I like the summarizing, the reflection piece. I think that's super important because if you don't know where you've been, you don't know how to move forward. But I see the different levels of kids. I know some will already be up here and some will have to kind of scaffold their way to get there. And some just think every idea they have is awesome.
Oh, this is so exciting. What I'm hearing here as well is this notion of collaboration, coming together and working, and that's going to be important. And this notion of what can potentially be done. Now, you and I work together quite a bit in this program, and you helped me in amazing ways. And quite often, when we should actually be recording all of our conversations, because sometimes some of the brainstorming that we do, right? I've been struggling with something for a little while. You take a look at it and go, well, Dwayne, why don't you just do that? Yes, sorry. That makes so much sense, or you've been struggling with something and I say, well, what about this button over here? What? That's all it takes. the collaboration.
And they've done that 100 times.
Yeah. The collaboration that I think is so important with deeper learning is something that also can be exemplified within the podcasting or long form video discussions and things like that. And so I think bringing this into your learning environment is going to provide students another aspect of ownership, another place to find and develop their voice, and then another place to engage people and invite them into the learning, invite them in to the exploration, invite them into the problem solving, right? So I think it's got so much potential. I think we need to really promote this type of an activity even more. Now, what problems do you see with this? What challenges do you see with doing this in your environment or even in higher ed? Because both you and I work in higher ed as well, and we've got graduate students. What challenges do you see that we need to
Well, it's
overcome?
interesting that that's the next question in this free flow conversation, because the whole time you're talking about the gathering of this information and how important it is, I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? So I think one of the big problems for me working with the kids is going to be noise level. Because I'm not going to have 20 kids at once in a podcast. And I only have them on that certain time. Mm-hmm. So noise level is going to be something that I'm going to have to figure out how to overcome. The second thing is miking them up. I've got a couple of really decent mics. My first thought, and I'm sure the first few podcasts will be the worst podcasts I ever make, and I'm okay with that because you got to learn somewhere. My first thought is I take my pretty decent, it's not a snowball anymore, I don't even know what it is, but my mic, set it in the middle of the table and have 2 or 3 of us sit around and just have a conversation. I'll send everybody else outside. I can do that. I got a couple people to watch them outside. And we will have a quick 5 or 6 minute conversation of whatever it might be. And that might be our starting point, because I figure from there it can only get better. I don't want to involve a whole lot of setup, because that I think would take away from the natural flow of it. So like all of the things we went through this morning, audio, sound, all that kind of stuff, I think my natural environment has to work. Like somehow I just need to be able to put the microphone out there, get the kids within appropriate distance, and just have a conversation. What I'm hoping doesn't happen, because we've videotaped the kids before in different scenarios, they kind of freeze up a little. So I'm thinking about this conversation that if I just sat on the couch with them, we would just have this amazing dialogue and we would forget what we said. When I put that microphone out there, I'm hoping the same kind of dialogue takes place and the microphone doesn't become, I don't know what to say type of conversation. So I'm torn between prepping them somewhat and maybe having them have little note cards to write down some ideas, but then it wouldn't be this natural conversation. So these are kind of some of my thoughts that I'm having. One thing that, I'm talking out loud here, I'm just kind of rambling, but I think with a couple of my very verbal kids would be the place to start, the ones that just keep on talking, because I don't think the microphone will intimidate them at all. So there's an opportunity to talk with 2 or 3 kids that are just full of ideas, and we can start the conversation. I can let others listen to that conversation, because I know that there are a couple of, oh, is that all you had to do? Oh, I can do that. So the little confidence inside of them will start bubbling, and I'll bring those kids into the conversation. And then my really super shy kids, I don't have a plan for them. That's the bottom line there. Maybe mix one of them in with 2 or 3 verbals and directly ask them a question that I know they're comfortable answering. I don't know, but those are some of my things. The sound, the intimidation of the microphone, the willingness to speak. Some of those things you can't really fix without practice. I think they're going to like hearing themselves. I don't sound like that. That's not me. But I think that's going to be fun. And, like anything else, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So I'm just going to start in our second week. We're just going to jump in and record something. I'm going to put it, I don't know where, somewhere on my website. I don't know, in a channel, just put the audio file out there so that parents can hear it and whoever they share it with, and get some feedback. Talk to the kids about how can we make this better? Can we make a radio show? Do you guys know what a radio show is? And just have them come up with the ideas, and maybe they'll come up with a recording solution. I don't really want to build I've seen people build these sound booths. I think that would take away from the flow, the natural flow. So those are some of the challenges, I think.
I agree with you. There's a lot of key ideas that I just want to sort of touch on. And this morning, we were playing around with lights and the sound. I've got a new audio device that allows me to control my sound volume between Zoom and my microphone, so that I don't have to do a bunch of work in post-production. So I probably have a little bit more sophisticated setup than most people do, but it's set up in such a way that once it's working, I walk into this position, I turn on a couple of things, and boom, we're going, right? And so that's the key thing that I'm hearing, is that I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to experiment. I'm going to explore. I'm going to take my Blue Yeti. Chances are you've got the Blue Yeti, right? Yeah, it's maybe a taller one. And the beautiful thing about the Blue Yeti is that it's got the ability to record omnidirectional.
Omnidirectional.
Yeah. So with the right microphone and getting kids comfortable with talking, they'll forget that it's there. Right. It'll work quite well. I've actually seen that happen. And what you're talking about doing is experimenting and exploring, and then having the kids engaged in that, and maybe they'll find a process and a procedure. Yes. You'll play around with the lighting to make sure you've got enough natural lighting. So once you've got things set up and you experiment, and the first couple might not be that good, but it's okay. It's part of the learning process, right? It's failing forward. And I think that's so important. So in terms of challenges, the noise level, now you work with kids more than I do. I'm primarily working in higher ed. So although the noise level can be pretty good with those people too, if the discussion is lively, but it's a different dynamic. Understanding your audience, understanding the groups that you're working with, understanding the importance, the inability or fear of talking, right? And what I'm hearing though is that with a little bit of preparation, little bit of planning, make sure you control the variables you can control, and then go with the flow with the variables that will sort of come along as you're doing it. So the key thing I'm hearing, and this is really important for people who are going to be listening to this, our students are going to be listening to this, is that this is an opportunity to explore, to experiment, to develop your voice, to collaborate, to hear yourself, to hear your group, to hear your community, develop ideas, and to take ownership and make a difference and create something that others can use as well. Because you had mentioned something earlier on, you want to change the world, right? And my shtick, I want to change the world one learner at a time. Well, guess what? We do that by creating that environment, giving our learners the ability to take that ownership and to explore and to experiment. And with podcasting or long form video, the reason I say long form video is that, watching two people talk in a conversation might be a little bit boring, but at the same time, when I talked to you about Joe Rogan, I watched Elon Musk listen to a question, and then he was kind of rubbing his chin. He was looking around. Yeah, you could see that he was thinking like that. If I would have just listening to that, I might have missed the significance. But he was actually thinking, and by the end, that actually drew me into the conversation, because in my mind, I was thinking, my gosh, this guy actually thinks about these questions, right? Most people, you ask them a question, boom, they just prattle on. Man, Musk actually thinks about those things. And so it really brought me into the conversation. So sometimes seeing the video component. Now, with your kids, they're going to be seeing a lot of stuff. I think you've got an opportunity to
Well,
do a lot of cool things,
with
right?
the kids, I might do audio only.
Oh, because of some of the hams in the group,
Well, yeah, and the
yeah, I know.
but
Going up to the camera,
sometimes,
right?
yeah, yeah. Sometimes the video piece, they really get nervous because they can see themselves being filmed, if you will. You know, if you use the like this, we can see each other, and they start like, I'm looking at your bookshelf. I'm not listening to you anymore. I'm going, what kind of books does he have on the bookshelf? Or something scuttles on the floor. Is that a marble? You know, and they detract from the conversation. If it's just audio, I have a lot of ADHD kids, a lot of autism, so they're not always, you know, looking at you. They're and they're talking. They're just saying stuff and moving. So immediately, I will not do video. I know I won't, just based on my population. I will do just audio. We'll get that rolling, and then I might add the video component, just because of like you say, know your audience. I think that would overwhelm some of the kids to bring the video on, based on past experiences of different video. If I bring my camera out just to take a picture of what we're working on, yeah. So I always, that's why a lot of times you won't see their faces, because I try to come up from behind them so they don't really know that my phone is in my hand ready to take pictures. So I with, you know, and with the kids, I just want to hear their thoughts. I'm not so much at this moment looking for their everything. Let's put it that way, right? I just want to know, what do you think about this? How should we proceed? So I know eventually video will come into it, because video is great. It taps all the senses, but I'm going to start with just the audio to get that rocking.
Well, I appreciate that wisdom, and you've said something several times, knowing your audience, and this is a term that both you and I use in the program and in our instruction, because and it goes back to my learning theory, you know, foundation. Jerome Bruner, first key component of creating an effective learning environment, recognizing your learner's preparedness. That's the formal term that he used. Well, that's knowing your audience, right? Knowing who your learner is, engaging them, being at the same level. And so recognizing that this might be a journey to get them to accustomed to certain things. Now, in our grad program, we're going to encourage students to go for the video and explore, because they can handle it, right? And part of the discomfort of this whole learning process is the learning process. That's just deeper learning, right? That's just the way that it works. And so in our conversation today, what we're doing and what we're modeling is a fact that coming together, exploring ideas, talking about these things. How are you going to do it? What are you going to do first? Well, then after I do this, I'll do this next. Recognizing some of the challenges, right? Sound levels, noisy rooms, right? Sounds like all you really need to do this well is a good microphone. Well, and maybe some preparation and planning, and with a video component, you know, it's not that difficult today. Again, we all have our iPhones.
Yeah.
Right, or our Android devices. We can do a lot. So the potential is amazing. I think we've covered a lot of really important things. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything that we might have overlooked, or is there any key takeaway that you think you want to share with our audience in terms of what you want to caution people or encourage people before we sort of summarize and you know, wrap this up?
I was just wondering if that was Elon Musk's thought. I so knowing some of our adults, and they're afraid to be on camera. What do I look like? What's my background? You know, what are people going to think of the mess behind me? Or, you know, just let all that go and focus on the message. What is the message that you want to put out in your podcast? What would you like people to know when I finished listening. That's really what I want them to focus on, not the backgrounds, the nervousness, the the ahs. We already talked about that. Keep it real. I know a lot of our students meet up and they talk to each other regularly. So just have a conversation, have a topic, have a moderator maybe as someone who kind of keeps the focus, and just keep it real. I think you'll be very happy with the outcome. And if you're not happy with the first outcome, the second outcome will be fantastic.
Or the third, or the fourth. I can count. There's going to be a few groups. Dr. H, we had to shoot this thing 6 times. That's up to you.
Right, it's up to you.
Yeah. I want to pick up on what you said there. That conversation, that honesty, that openness, the willingness to engage, I think is extremely important. Now, I want to set a little bit of a context. Our students in the ADL program are going to be using a podcast as a way to summarize and organize some of the publication work that they're doing. Guess what? They have a story. So my little tip is, remember, you're bringing people into your story. It's your story. It's your group's story. And people love stories. You can change the world with stories. So remember, you want to be able to tell the story of what you've been working on, the story of what you're doing, and the story of where you're planning to go. Bring people into your story. Have a conversation with each other in the podcast, but maybe almost think about the audience and have a conversation with them. Remember that our job as educators is to change the world one learner at a time, is to make that difference in our learners' lives. And if we can share great ideas, and if people can take 1 or 2 key little kernels of information away and sprinkle what I call the pixie dust of learning on what they're doing, it will change the world. So I think we've covered it, haven't we?
Well, I think so. This is great.
Yeah, I want to thank you. I'm looking forward to doing more of this in the future. And so I'm inviting Sue into the learner's mindset discussions, and Talissa will be coming back too. She's sort of shifted a role in the work that she's doing, and she and I are meeting tomorrow to do this as well. So I'm excited. I'm excited to share these ideas about podcasting and to model what you and I do. And what we can do. And so we want you to take this into your learning environment and see how you can actually engage your learners and engage yourself with the exploration. So give podcasting a go, give the long form video discussion a go. And you too can change the world one learner at a time.